Well, it's been a while since we've had a new release, but it's finally time to talk about a movie again. Or, as the 1930s would put it, a brand new motion picture, baby. Let's get started. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Hey everyone, welcome to Thumb Together. My name is Andrew Fantasia, and today we're going to be talking about Mank together. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. Where to begin with Mank? Mank is a movie I've been looking forward to for quite a while because it's a movie about the making of a movie that I absolutely love. Mank chronicles the struggle of our main character, Herman Mankiewicz, during the writing process for one of the greatest movies ever made, Citizen Kane. How did Mank write Citizen Kane? Under what conditions did he write it? And what was going on in his life and in the world of Hollywood during the time? Well, that's exactly what Mank is all about. And this is David Fincher's first movie since Gone Girl. We've been waiting a long time to see Fincher back behind the lens. So how does this movie fare? To be honest, I feel like I expected better. Quick recap for those not familiar with the story of Herman Mankiewicz. He was a washed-up alcoholic writer in Hollywood. I mean, really, is there any other kind of writer in Hollywood? Zing! Who was given one last chance to kind of clear his name and do what he was good at, which is write a motion picture. He was hired by Orson Welles himself to pen a screenplay without taking credit for it, but he would be well compensated and he would be tucked away in the Mojave Desert so he wouldn't have his wife and kids and alcohol as a distraction. Of course, Mank drinks anyway, he finds a way to do so, and spends the rest of the movie trying to figure out how to write this motion picture as we flash back to a decade earlier and see what led up to Mank's downfall as a writer in the first place. Spoilers, alcohol was involved because the 1930s. And through this little guided tour of Depression-era Hollywood, we meet such prominent figures as Louis B. Mayer, the titular mayor of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, David O. Selznick, newspaper baron William Randolph Hearst, and his young mistress, Marion Davies. And it's those last two characters who bear special mention because, according to hearsay that's been going on for the past 70 plus years, William Randolph Hearst and Marion Davies were the inspiration for Charles Foster Kane and his second wife, respectively. Now, throughout the movie, we see snippets as to why that might be, even though Mank himself keeps firmly insisting that Marion Davies is not meant to be a one-to-one scale stand-in of Charles Foster Kane's second wife. Now, it's in this batch of colorful characters where I think Mank really shines. I mean, you're always going to get a good performance out of Gary Oldman. That is just a given. You're fine. You got Gary Oldman, you're going to be okay. And he crushes it as Mank. Amanda Seyfried crushes it as Marion Davies. She is doing a really good job being not just this complex character, but this complex character in the 1930s. And that's difficult to do, especially for somebody as young as Seyfried. It's hard to step into a person from that era because a person from that era thinks, speaks, talks, moves, even breathes differently than people from today. But she got it. Charles Dance plays a very quiet William Randolph Hearst. He doesn't have much to say or do, but when he's on screen, he's a commanding presence, as Charles Dance is wont to be. And this is just a personal sort of thing for me, but I was fascinated with the idea of learning more about Hearst because I knew about this whole sort of comparison that was drawn between Hearst and Kane, but we really don't get a whole lot of Hearst in this movie. So if you're like me and you were like, ooh, I want to learn more, was Hearst really that much like Charles Kane? You don't get that here, unfortunately. And then there's Arliss Howard playing like a note-perfect Louis Mayer, and he's just the sort of scummy dude who would run Hollywood back in the day and use his power to push people around and get what he wants and kind of step on the little guy on his way to the top. And hey, wow, 90 years later and zero has changed. Speaking of zero things changing 90 years later, there's a nice and very subtle little dig at Donald J. Trump buried somewhere in this movie. I'll let you find that, but you'll know it when you hear it. As for Orson Welles himself, he's played by this guy Tom Burke, who I wasn't too familiar with going into this. Now, Burke doesn't look a whole lot like Orson Welles. I mean, he looks passable as Orson Welles, but damn, does he ever sound like Orson Welles. Well, I don't know if they used a voice stand-in. I don't think they did, but he nailed that. Oh my God. Like, as soon as you hear him talk, I gasped a little bit. So in the same way that Citizen Kane, the film, took this idea of telling the story out of sequential order, where you have the present with this investigative journalist trying to figure out the secret of Rosebud, mixed in with these flashbacks of the past, Mank works in much the same fashion, which I thought was really clever, where you've got the present, which is Mank lying in this bed in the Mojave Desert with a stunningly beautiful Lily Collins looking after him, lucky bastard, trying to write this screenplay. And you continuously flash back to starting from a decade earlier and working your way towards the present as Mank kind of loses his groove in Hollywood, makes some enemies out of Mayer, makes some enemies out of Hearst, and just becomes more and more washed up as the Depression takes its toll on the industry until we catch up with the present time. And finally, we end things, I'd say spoilers, but this story is 80 years old, so you have had plenty of time to be warned. We end with the Academy Awards, in which Mank and Welles win the Best Original Screenplay Oscar, even though Orson Welles didn't write a damn thing. As far as we know. Maybe he had some say when they were, making a third or fourth or fifth draft of the script. The movie doesn't go that far to tell us, but from what we gather, this was completely penned by Herman Mankiewicz, and Welles just took half the credit and an Oscar. In fact, there's a great comment that Mank makes right at the end of the movie where he's making an acceptance speech years later in a news broadcast where he says, "I guess I'd like to make this acceptance speech in the same way that I wrote the movie itself," which is to say, with Orson Welles completely absent. Orson Welles is going to need some aloe for that burn. And the movie just looks gorgeous. I mean, Fincher paid a lot of detail to the cinematography. He stated in interviews that he wanted this to look like an old, lost movie that had been restored. You get a lot of those sunspot marks on the films, which it looked cool, but then they used it a bunch of times and it was always in the same spot with the same shape, so it kind of took you out of it. But at least they were trying, and I really like the way it looks. It's just a beautiful looking motion picture. But unfortunately, I think my praise has to stop there. Mank didn't do it for me in the way that I hoped it would, because I didn't feel like I learned anything fascinating about the making of Citizen Kane, other than, seeing these little jabs that Mank and Welles took at each other after the fact. Instead, it kind of told me things that I could have already guessed, which is that, yes, this is kind of based on Hearst, but not really. And yes, this is kind of based on Marion, but not really. And that, hey, surprise, surprise, people in Hollywood in the 1930s and 40s were assholes. No shocker there. It also gets a little bit grating because, guys, this is a 2-hour and 12-minute movie. This is a nice, hefty movie, and we spend all of it with Mank. I don't think there is a scene in which Gary Oldman is not present. But the thing is, Mank is a writer. And whoever wrote this movie, whoever wrote the Mank movie, decided that everybody should talk like a writer, especially Mank. So everybody, no matter who it is, from Mank himself to the randomest person on the randomest street corner, has some kind of witty, well-crafted repartee to go with every moment at any given time. And it feels really fake, and it feels really annoying, to be honest. And Mank does it most of all because he is a writer. So by the end of 2 hours and 12 minutes, you're looking at this man and you're like, I sympathize with him because this has been his story, but my God, Mank is insufferable. And if any human being actually talked like this for their whole life, you can understand why nobody would want to be around them. There's a particular scene where Mank wakes up after one of his many alcohol benders, and he literally has just opened his eyes from having been passed out, blackout drunk for hours and hours, nursing an enormous hangover with his head pounding, and somebody's talking to him, and he's still being witty and jabby about it. And he's like, "Oh, I say, my friend, blah, 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 wit, haha, stoic wit, raised eyebrow." And I'm like, dude, you have a hangover, you're sick, you're probably nauseous. Nobody would talk like that in your state. And it just gets way out of control, man. So the dialogue in Mank really needed to tone it down, and it goes at such a lightning fast pace that you kind of get a headache by the time you're through. And I'm just, frankly, when the credits rolled, I was grateful that I didn't have to spend any more time with these people because they were not pleasant. But again, maybe that's sort of a shape of things to come. If I ever want to work in Hollywood, this is what I'm in for. All in all, great performances, gorgeous looking movie, but a tale that I don't think had any emotional heft to it. And I think at the end of the day, that's where Mank suffers the most is I had no emotional connection with this story, and I had no emotional need to see it played out to its end. Yes, I considered it a nice little win that Mank got A, the writing credit that he wanted, and B, the praise and accolade he deserved for writing such a great screenplay. But that's where it stopped. There was no point in this movie where I felt that emotionally he needed to write this screenplay because of everything that had happened to him, and this was sort of his way, his catharsis of summing up this unfortunate portion of his life into art and channeling it into that art and making it something good. I was sort of hoping to see that as the emotional arc of Mank, and that wasn't the case. Really, I couldn't tell you what the emotional arc of Mank was because it seemed non-existent to me. And that ain't a good thing. So, unfortunately, Mank is something that I watched once and I thought it's okay, but I don't think I'll be going back to it anytime soon. But that has been Mank. That has been Thumb Together. I've been Andrew Fantasia. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you here next time, and until then, adios.